Hey guys, Ryan here, and we now find ourselves in the Zords of Power Rangers Season 8, Lightspeed Rescue. And of course it all starts here with the rather unimaginatively named Lightspeed Megazord. However, from my own personal story, this was the right season at the right time. It kind of felt like Power Rangers were growing up a bit more, and I'll explain that a bit more in a minute, and it also fulfilled the main thing I look for. It surprised me. The Zords of Lightspeed Rescue, while treading fairly familiar footing, felt really fresh and unique and different to what we'd had before. This one kind of less so, but I do admire how well done it is. I think what surprised me about Lightspeed was that it was all man-made stuff. What I mean is that every previous season of Power Rangers was sourced through some mythical or otherwise science fiction methods. MMPR used various versions of power coins. Zeo, of course, had the Zeo crystal. Turbo, we presume, somehow still used the crystal as well. In Space was, of course, originated in outer space, and Lost Galaxy had the mythical Quasar Sabers. Lightspeed Rescue was the first season to be like an agency, almost felt kind of government-based, and they had somehow been able to copy the Power Ranger powers and Zords. It's never really mentioned or detailed in the show, but we presume they've somehow hacked their way into the morphin grid. And in a sense, it's actually kind of a nice extension of the last time we were on Earth in the series, in the Countdown to Destruction in Space finale, when everyday citizens kind of came together to profess that they were Power Rangers in order to kind of unite and stand against Astronomer's army. This kind of feels like the natural extension of that everyone does become Power Rangers in a sense, but of course they're chosen for special abilities that line up with the powers that they've been able to build. Where was I in Power Rangers terms? Well, it's the year 2001, and of course I have no business being a 13-year-old who still wants toys designed for 4+-year-olds. Having said that, they got me again. And this big little thing and the 6 Ranger figures are now the only presents I can actually remember from that birthday. Talking the toy history then, it came out in 1999 in Japan for the GoGoFive Sentai series. It was known as the Victory Robo. As per the course, Power Rangers got it for their own incarnation a year later in 2000, of course as the Lightspeed Megazord, and of course us still being a year behind in England, got it in 2001. Interestingly, these Zords, like the Galactabeasts from the season before them, combine into a Megazord with a totally different name. Notably, together these form the season name, albeit in reverse, so the Rescue Zords combine into the Lightspeed Megazord, or the Lightspeed Megazord separates into the Rescue Zords. I guess this was still early days for the show, and they were still trying to avoid reusing the same Megazord name, so they didn't want to have a second Rescue Megazord just a couple years down the road from the pretty perfect Turbo Rescue Megazord. But of course they couldn't call them the Lightspeed Zords because, as we see on the show, they're definitely not the fastest way to get to the scene of the rescue. Let's talk the design then. So these are obviously emergency vehicles termed the Rescue Zords. We've got Carter the Red Ranger's Pyro Rescue 1, kind of a fire engine truck thing with extendable ladders with kind of fists on the end. A cool rescue light thing, which would be better if it lit up, but I think very strikingly similar to the Turbo Rescue equivalent. We've got Chad the Blue Ranger's Aqua Rescue 2, and here we do start to divert from the Turbo Rescue Zord inspiration, where that was actually a police car. Here it's actually a water truck, and you do start to see how all these Zords fit together as one cohesive unit. This thing can obviously assist the Pyro Rescue Zord by spraying water at the fire. As far as Zords go, it's not the most interesting, but it's absolutely fine. We've got Joel the Green Ranger's Aero Rescue 3, named as such for it being the only flying Zord, and it actually comes in handy quite a bit through the Zord rescue scenes, as unusually for Power Rangers they go for this sort of ultra-grounded reality-based thing where the Zords that can't fly can't just fly into Megazord mode. It has to have Aero Rescue 3 as a kind of pulley method to lift it into position, which I remember feeling really quite impressed by. We were so used to Zords just kind of flying into formation. This, much like the creation of the powers through the government, was yet another touch that grounded the idea. I really like Aero Rescue 3, it's kind of Terminator inspired jet engine with these thrusters which you can rotate and that lock into 2 different positions. It's a really compact Zord, slightly larger than maybe the Pink Ranger's crane from season 3, but because the rest of the Zords are so much smaller than we would typically see, they actually scale together so much more nicely. Kelsey, the Yellow Ranger's Has Rescue 4 Zord, kind of a big dump truck I thought at first, so I never used to understand what has meant, although a quick search online today tells me heat affected zone, which is a meaning. It would kind of go with the theming of the rest though, fires being the big bad of what these Zords were up against. This Zord, like the Red Ranger's Pyro Rescue Zord, does have an action feature in that it's got this digging shovel thing in the back, which is actually only useful in its Zord mode, so quite a nice feature to have. And lastly, Dana the Pink Ranger's Med Rescue 5 Zord. And again, just like Turbo Rescue, it's an ambulance or a box on wheels, though mostly in the show it's shown to be a big lorry for cars to get in and escort them away from the scene of danger. I always found that a bit strange that it was masquerading as an ambulance, but really it's just a car transportation Zord. Together, of course, they formed the Lightspeed Megazord, and this is kind of a cool robot. It is kind of obvious which piece of the Megazord belongs to which Ranger and where each of the Zords has gone, apart from, of course, the Green Ranger, which kind of gets swallowed into the combination and completely obscured in colour terms from the front of the Megazord. The way the girls' Zords are positioned as feet reminds me, of course, of their positioning in the Zeo Megazord, and harkens all the way back to the Thunder and original Dino Megazords in their positioning, with the front of the Zords being the kind of toes. The Megazord, I think, has a really cool head design with a sleek black visor plate over its eyes, and of course the Lightspeed emblem is adorned all over this thing in various different textures and materials, from stickers to like chrome plating. What are the differences to the original? So a quick 1 second side by side comparison, you're unlikely to pick up on just what they changed for America. So that's actually kind of a good thing. You can easily get away with just having the Power Rangers version if you so wish. However, there are definitely a few cost saving initiatives for Power Rangers, and they start with the die-cast feet and die-cast shoulders. So the girls' Zords actually had die-cast front grille pieces, but these were changed to chrome for America. Hey, at least we still got chrome. Some years, like Turbo, we didn't even get that. Then of course, Pyro Rescue 1's Japanese equivalent actually had die-cast in his shoulder joints for some kind of extra durability, I guess. Unfortunately for us, it has been reduced back down to plastic. The 4-wheeled Zords have had their wheels turned to plastic from the original rubber, so you actually lose quite a lot of texture detail in that, which is kind of a shame. But you know, some people might prefer that. Plastic will obviously roll across the floor a lot quicker, and you're unlikely to get particles stuck between them as much. So that one I kind of can understand and hasn't really bothered me too much. It bothers me a lot more now that I'm such a stickler for accuracy, far more than it would have done back when I was 13 and just wanted the toy. In happier news, it seems like all the stickers and the rest of the chrome parts, like the significant amount of chrome on Aero Rescue 3, have all made it over intact. What's bad about it then? Well, I can't hide my first impression of this thing when I got it out of the box was, oh, where's the rest of it? This Megazord is slightly less mega than we had been getting in the years up to it. I just remember being so surprised by the demure stature of this thing. Even assembled, it was only about 1.5 action figures high, which just seemed tiny. And of course, having seen it on the show, I knew where it needed to fit later on, so of course it should be smaller. But it was still a surprise. I almost think part of me thought it was going to be the Super Train that compensated for the sizing and was bigger than anything. But it turns out this is quite the departure point for Power Rangers, where Megazord sizing starts to go a little wacky. Continuing what's negative about it, how about the awkward way the fists work on Pyro Rescue 1? So not only do you have 2 fists sticking out the back of the Zord, not an uncommon practice in the show of course, but the way that you actually get them out for Megazord mode really sucks. I've never seen anyone best this. You have to pull the arms out entirely and then very gently push them back in, very gradually, because if you do apply just a little too much pressure, then they're back in the Zord again and you have to start again. While I do think this is hands down better than the fist solution from the Lost Galaxy Megazord, this is still very annoying, and I'm glad that we don't really see it again. While it is very cool and nice that they've replicated the ladder arms that we see so often in the show, they don't really look the same, especially the final extended piece where it's just this really thin black plastic. And while we are talking about Pyro Rescue 1, let's talk about the 3 big problems that most people will have with this Megazord. I think one of the most common ones is what I'm going to term the loose left arm syndrome. This is literally baffling because this is not the arm that you would usually use for like the power sword, so strange that this one has gone loose. It looks like they're held on with some kind of pin. Does anyone know how to remove these? It's actually exactly what happened to my Mega Voyager Mega V4 Zord. I don't know, maybe it's me. The second problem is that the shoulder joint is actually quite common to break on the USA version. You remember they've switched it out from diecast from Japan. I think maybe the added force of people pulling out the extendable arms to get the fist to reveal is stressing that plastic joint, and that must be what's breaking it. That or people are just accidentally dropping it while they're deployed, and maybe it's just shattering straight off. What you often will see is that weirdly, by attaching Aero Rescue 3 on top into its Megazord position, it'll actually provide enough friction and force to keep the shoulder in place, although obviously it's not attached and it'll just fall off. Fortunately, this is not a problem that I'm experiencing as yet. I'm just like hyper aware of it and would advise you guys to be as well. And the big one, the one that I think really sucks the enjoyment out of this thing, the attachment clips from Pyro Rescue to Aqua Rescue are not well thought out in any way. They were just done wrong. They were not thought out for long-term lasting. They're not hard wearing, and it does seem to affect the Japanese version as well. So not a flaw introduced just for the American version this time. There's something incompatible about the sizing of those clips. I think probably the tabs on the Aquazord are just too big, so it will cause splitting and shattering of the clips within the Pyro Rescue Zord. It's a real great shame. One of mine has snapped off completely and the other one seems loose, so naturally my Pyro Rescue 1 is not really attached, it's just kind of sat there, and as soon as you manipulate the arms or move it in any way, it falls off. I did discover that the clips are actually on a separate piece to the rest of the Zord. They're held in with 4 screws. If that's the only issue with your Pyro Rescue 1, buy a replacement. You can remove that plate, swap them over, and bring your Megazord back to full efficiency. I guess you can look at this like a positive or a negative, that all the problems you're likely to encounter with Lightspeed Megazord are confined to one problem Zord. At least you'll only have to replace one of them to get it back to good quality. However, the obvious downside to that is that everyone is going to want the same Zord, which is going to bump the price up. You'll often find, and this is maddening, that it's usually the same price to buy a complete Lightspeed Megazord than it is just to replace Pyro Rescue 1. One thought that I'm often wrestling with about this thing is that isn't it just a smaller, less interesting version of Turbo Rescue Megazord? And while I think there's definitely some merit to that, I think let's get on to the next section to really conclude this, because what is good about it? Well, this was definitely a fun release, and you're shown that each Zord has an obvious purpose and part to play as an overall team of Zords, which wasn't something that we often got. Also, unlike the Turbo Rescue Zords, we actually often saw them in action in Zord mode. They didn't just kind of appear and then cut straight to Megazord mode. I think that was really clever, and it did make me want the Zords more because I actually saw them in use and actually having a purpose, which Power Rangers isn't always the best at doing. It usually will just introduce the Zords and then they turn into Megazord. When you're putting the Zords together into Megazord mode, the combination leads to a sort of midway 3 Zord combination mode, which is interesting. I used to think of it as the Aqua on Stilts mode, otherwise known as Hydro mode, with the water jets on top. You actually need to manually detach these on the back and peg them in. It would have been much greater if they could have slid down kind of in the same way that the legs themselves do, and like how we saw on the show, but I guess that just wasn't possible with the way they'd already used that swinging method to allow the legs to change modes. One kind of cool thing, the way those legs do rotate into transformation mode means that you do get a kind of fake walking ability out of it. They don't go forwards unfortunately, but they do rotate backwards as though the leg is trying to get back into the Zord mode. The mid combination mode, while looking a little silly, was actually a little bit different and interesting and still fits in with the rescue theme. You might be wondering what the Pyro and Aero Rescue Zords are supposed to be doing at this point. Well, they do actually have a, I'm hesitant to say, combined mode going on as well. You do actually need a secondary piece which only comes with the Super Train Megazord to create this mode. I'm breaking my usual rule and showing it off early because I think it's fairly forgettable and would be completely drowned out by the Super Train review. So here it is. It's sort of a carriage mode, unfortunately not as large as the in-show platform version we would sometimes see, which was actually able to carry all 4 of the wheeled Zords. But hey, it's fine, although the Zord does slide out if you angle it too far. Although it is kind of basic, and it is a shame that the Aero Rescue Zords can't deploy its kind of magnetized rope attachments like the Super Mini Pla has recently been able to give us. I do remember feeling quite impressed by this, that the 5 Zords kind of had these 2 different combined modes going on. I don't think I'd seen that before. I also think we have to give some serious props to the transformation of 3 of the 5 Zords. While the girl Zords are fairly part and parcel with what we'd seen before, I do really like how the blue, red and green Zords turn into their combination mode. And disregarding all the problems, especially the Red Ranger Zord, which really swings around in all directions to get into its finished transformation mode. And I really like how satisfying it is to drop the Aero Rescue Zord into place. It fills in that blank space so seamlessly. The back looks really good because you've still got the jet propulsors on show as sort of a backpack. The way the head is revealed I think is really smart. This was just a really fun toy to put together. And of course you've got quite a nice power sword bearing the Lightspeed logo insignia kind of thing, which also features on the Megazord, so you can mimic that rotating effect that you would often see. It is kind of a bit annoying how it's just loose, it just kind of stops spinning. I would have liked to kind of click and lock it into place, but hey, it's kind of cool, it's a nice feature to have. And the other reason why I'm so reticent to say that the Turbo Rescue Megazord is superior is that the Turbo Rescue Megazord, other than fitting in Artillatron, didn't really do a great deal else. With this Megazord, it's just the beginning, and we're actually going to keep seeing it throughout the season in various different ways. So while I wouldn't say it's one of the best designed Megazords ever, I will say the way that they integrated it into the season and the way they showed off and made the most of its Zord mode really made it seem more valuable, useful and desirable than it would be otherwise. What's your guys' take then on the Lightspeed Megazord? Have you had just as many or even more problems with Pyro Rescue 1? Or maybe it's one of the other Zords that's broken for you? As always, do let me know in the comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and follow me on Instagram at PowerRangergram. You know very well where we're going next for Lightspeed. It was our first train-based Megazord, and in my opinion, still the best. So we'll get to the Super Train next time. Until then, see you later.